Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to an April 24th edition of the MSP Initiative Live. We are live and on the road, which happens as the year goes on. As you know, there's 8,000 events to go to. I know I'm exaggerating, hundreds of events to go to. Today also happens to be the NFL draft. As you know, I have my Eagles gear as usual. So that is timely because it is that time of year and it is that time of season. But anyway, as you know, the technology sandbox doesn't ever stop. There's always stuff going on. We'll talk a little bit about some current events today, but new guest on the show for the first time, Colin from Devicie. So we're going to learn a little bit about Colin and Colin's company. And this session is being recorded like every other MSP Initiative session. And you'll see all of our stuff available at mspinitiative.com. Colin, how are we doing today, buddy?
We're good. We're good. Everybody's traveling, right? So, I've been in upstate New York and I'm on the way back to Manhattan and then heading off to RSA at the weekend. And then we got Kaseya Connect next week. Yeah, it's busy, busy.
Exactly. Well, I'm not too far away from you. I'm actually here in Newark Airport. So we have that technically still part of the New York airport system, but in New Jersey, for whatever
Yes,
that's worth.
yeah, exactly. How that works, I don't mind. But as long as the airport codes are the same, we're good.
Exactly. Well, you're in this part of the world, the country and the world at a good time of year when it's like 80 degrees outside. So that's never a
Yeah,
bad thing.
it's beautiful today. So
Yeah.
anyway,
For my
good to
colleagues who live in upstate New York, I call that the tundra for a lot of the year, where it's, frigid and cold, but I'm sure they're having a little bit of nice weather as well. So, Colin, this is your first time on the show. I always like to, I don't know, learn a little bit about you, the person, right? Like your background, how you got into, technology, right? And then we can pivot into a little bit about like what Devicie is for people who haven't heard that name before. But go ahead, start wherever you want to.
I'm old enough that starting at the beginning is probably too long, but I did spend the late '80s working in the recording industry, which
Wow.
was in London, which was a fun time. That introduced me to the Apple Mac, and that's how I'd grown up around computers. My dad was in computer technology, but I got into the Macintosh, which led me into the publishing systems and kind of all the way down the line that eventually put me into the States and doing various startups. And for the last 12 years, I've worked in and around this MSP space and similar things with various portfolio companies of Insight Partners, the growth venture company. So I was part of the team at TeamViewer. Um, we sold it to Permira. Logic Now, which became SolarWinds MSP, which became Enable. So I was there, which was all part of the GFI group at that time, and then various other similar investment businesses. And I specialize in helping companies grow. So whilst I've got a technology background, most of what I've got the scars, as I like to say, um, to kind of figure out how to help software companies grow, and that's what I do.
That's very interesting. So you're actually your personal journey very much intertwines with what I like to call the MSP sandbox's history, right?
Yeah,
GFI, goes back quite a bit, and Enable's sister company, SolarWinds, just sold, I think, less than 10 days ago for
yeah,
4.4 billion. That was a successful, outcome for that business. Given not too long ago, I think 2 years, maybe 3 years, they had the whole cyber incident, right, with SolarWinds. Um, but and then Enable, kind of separated logically, but they were still traded, on the exchange, right? Um, so let me ask you this question before we get into, other things. I would like to understand from your point of view how the wheel is now spinning then based on, you mentioned, I think, insight, right? There's
Yep.
obviously a lot of venture capital dollars still flooding in, and I argue as the interest rate will ultimately come down, in my opinion, those dollars will turn back on even faster, right? So do there's a Jekyll and Hyde part of this conversation, but from where you sit, do you think that's a good thing for the whole, or do you find that, you know, time constraints create problems in how the industry works when the money man is behind you?
There's a lot of questions inside that question. So let's start with obviously I work with growth equity. I work with these investment teams and go into businesses. I'm always like part of the business. I'm not in the investment team itself. So
Mhm.
I have very much a how do I help that business grow, and how do I help that area go on? Um, the A lot of the venture capital companies who have invested in this space and know this space have a much better understanding of what's going on in the space than people give them credit for. It's pretty easy to go knock them and go, oh, they're just money, they're doing this, but there's just a lot of negativity around the money they go spend. But you got to remember, these guys, like particularly the investment team at Insight, has been around this whole space longer than many people who are in it, right? They've been investing in this space. If you look back to the GFI money, right? You know, Insight's 30 years old. They've been doing IT investing all that time, right? And
Wow. Yeah.
um, and so their understanding of the space, their understanding of the dynamics of the space, the pieces that have come through is very well formed. They have very
Mm.
good opinions of what's going on, and very kind of deep knowledge. And if you look across, I can't remember the exact number right now of cyber investments they own. They've got in, but it's like 80 just in cyber. And then, even just within the MSP space, obviously Kaseya and Veeam, and they were early money in Wiz, right? You just go down the list. They are very well informed about the space and about what's going on, much more than people
Hmm.
give them credit for.
I mean, I don't think I ever actually thought how the time span here, the fact that we're talking about decades. I mean, they
Yes.
have a lot of macro data that I don't think I even considered until you just mentioned it, right?
Yeah. And so when they look at these businesses, they're well informed about what good looks like. They know what metrics really matter. They understand the challenges of the space, right, and what it takes. And so, there's a lot of things that they bring to the table that people just don't give them credit for. So
Mm.
I think we've got to kind of take that into it, because it's really easy just to go, or private equity or whatever is think about the negative side of it. And there are organizations and things that have been negatives, but generally speaking, they've birthed and grown a lot of very good companies.
Sure. So usually the next thing I talk about right after this part of the conversation is the consolidation turned into bundling pricing wars,
Yeah.
which,
So
I mean,
I was just listening. I was just listening to your episode from last week, right? And you brought that up and you talk about it. And yeah, I mean, it's acquiring a customer, like just stepping away from whether it's this industry or anything else. Like acquiring a customer is much more expensive, right, than retaining a customer. And
Mm.
so you you know you go and once you've acquired a customer, you need to service them well, which is why everybody talks about community and building the community, particularly in this space, right? Whether you're Enable or Kaseya or whomever, right? Everybody talks about the community aspect. Why? Well, that's part of retention, right? You're only going to retain people who are happy. And then the second part is, so how do you grow your business? Okay, you've acquired companies, you've acquired customers, you're keeping them happy so they stick with you. It's sell them more things, right? And what's the easiest way to sell them more things? Bundle it. And so as
Mm.
the maturity of an organization goes on, for them to maintain growth, they have to have new pieces to add to the offering, right? And it's got to make sense, right? It's technically got to make sense, but it's financially got to make sense as well. So, you know, the more mature a software company, the more likely it is to be bundling other pieces in and or playing with that, those particular deck of cards to, achieve their financial goals.
So let me go to the other elephant in the room, right? I feel like in the MSP industry is a micro segment of the larger technology industry, right? So,
Sure.
or at least that's how I
Yeah.
view it. But
Yeah. In dollars. Yeah.
so when you look up to the people upstairs, you think Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, right? Like those big name, big dollar companies. Like, and there's others, right? Well, Microsoft, if you look at what they've done even in the last 3 years, right? They've effectively increased the price of Microsoft 365 or Office 365, whatever their branding is, by almost 45% over 3 years, right? And like, I assume there's a lot of reasons they did that, right? The cost of electricity, bandwidth, data centers, all of that stuff. But like, that's when you're that big, right? You're like, well, where else are you going to go, right? And it's a little bit different when you're not at the top of the food chain.
Yeah. They're doing the same thing that everybody else is doing, right? So you look at their licensing SKUs, business standard, business premium, E3, E5, right? They are they are driving people up the stack and getting them to consolidate on the tooling and the bundling by getting more and more of it, right? Nobody's buying individual licenses of stuff anymore in Microsoft. They're buying bundles, right? That's how you buy it. It's the most cost-effective way to do it. And then they're adding value with new things. So Copilot as one there, right? That's not free. That comes along. And they're also then doing kind of bundling messaging around, well, why have 4, 5, 6, 10 different vendors doing different things when you can have a suite of products from us that you're largely paying for all the pieces in your licenses already? Why not consolidate on that, right? So whether or not business premium is a great example, right? It's got a lot of the great things in that people want, and a lot of people don't use all of that capability.
And I was literally just about to mention that reality, right? Like back before everybody subscribed to every streaming service on the planet, you would call up the local cable or fiber company, you'd subscribe to the plan, right?
Yeah.
And like in the plan is like 250 channels. I may only watch 7 of them, right? So like I'm paying for this bundle of entertainment and of channels that they're charging me for the whole thing, but I'm not really using it all.
Exactly. But bundling, yeah, so bundling just works in so many markets and so many levels. And so that's kind of a key thing from it. And to kind of pivot this slightly into, well, let's go somewhere else first with it. So for organizations to grow, then there's a couple of things that have got to happen. Obviously, you can increase your price, but you've got to increase the value from it, unless you become uncompetitive, right? Or unless you've got such a monopoly that you have, like, that you're going to do that anyway. So, they're going to add features, price go up for that. They're going to bundle things. That's what it drives. The second is expanding their total addressable market. And so if you look at, say, well, let's stick with Microsoft again, right? Lots and lots of people use it, but how do they drive more usage, particularly at the smaller end of the game? You were saying, MSP market is a quite small market, or a little thing of it. It might be by dollars, right? It might be by dollars. It might be by seat count compared to the Fortune companies. But actually, in terms of accounts, it is very significant, right? In terms of the number of accounts under management, number of entities under management. When you're talking about Australia and ANZ market as well, and some of the market differences there. The average company size, average entity size in Australia is something like less than 350 seats. there's only like 0.2 of the organizations in Australia that are bigger than 350 seats. So
Mm.
it, it that's why the MSP market is so strong down there, because it at that seat count, it makes a lot of sense, right, to use an MSP as opposed to having your own IT department. And the US, obviously different sizing, but small businesses and small medium corporations are a huge engine in terms of the number of organizations that are there to sell to and to service.
Mm. I mean, they always say that, at least 50% of the economy would be small companies, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you know, take the
When you
government,
when you
take the
think how big the
government
company
employees
is,
out of
right?
it, right? And you just
Correct.
talk about the actual for-profit companies, from
Yeah.
that measurement. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's only, I think the US is like 2% of businesses are greater than 500 users, something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Something
Yeah.
around that.
So
So
when you get something like an E3 or an E5 or even Business Premium, um, there's a lot of things in that bundle. And how do you become productive with that environment? How do you achieve what that environment's going to give you without external help, right? And that's where the MSPs come, right? Not everybody can afford to have their Microsoft 365 expert on staff as well as an IT team, right?
yeah.
And that's what the MSP market brings into this. And
So so so,
yeah,
so for the people that argue that the Microsofts of the world, their end game is to just have everybody but go direct and buy from them. Is that a false fear, or is that the
I
big plan?
I think that's a false fear. We got to separate go to market from you got to separate go to market motion, how you procure, from
Yeah.
what tool you should use. So, do I think they want everybody to use all their tools? Absolutely.
Mhm.
They absolutely just, a few weeks ago they announced you can now get E5 security on top of BP, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big change. That's a recognition that security stack can be made available to small medium businesses and small medium corporations, right? And that's super interesting. It's what, an extra $12, right? Which can add up, but when you look at what you're paying elsewhere, you're probably spending more than that elsewhere. So their argument is you should consolidate on their stack. Of course, that's their argument. And they are looking, they are paying a lot more attention to the SMB and SMC and MSP market, because they know the MSPs are the unlock for consolidation of tooling in that space. So they are paying a lot of attention to
Okay. I would say, if that's the case, like, if I'm going maybe not as far back as 30 years back, but remember, before Office 365, it was BPOS, right? Business
that.
Productivity Suite. And like Intune was in its infancy, right? And like the idea of the RMM in its MSP form, right? Think the Kaseya RMM, think LabTech, which became then the ConnectWise RMM, think Enable, think, like, I don't think they
Logic
understood
now.
that model. No, I mean, yeah, Logic Now,
Yeah,
right? I don't think Microsoft at that point in
no,
time understood that model, right? But I
they
think
didn't
they
understand it,
made,
and I don't think they
yeah,
cared about it
yeah.
then. Yeah. Oh, now
Like
they
what?
understand it.
But today, I think, but they're not quite there yet. But I feel like they're inching in that direction.
Um, they're a super tanker, so it takes time for them to turn. But when they put their minds to something, they are going to turn, right? And they're um, we can talk about what Devicie does, and you'll hear why my opinion is
No,
in that
listen,
way, right?
perfect time to cross the
Yeah,
bridges here, right? So I remember I was flown out as an MSP back in somewhere between 2008 and 2010. And one of the reasons they brought me out was I had consumed a ton of Intune. My idea was to try and make Intune my RMM. I
yeah,
ran into a lot of glass ceilings very quickly. And so they took a lot of feedback from me back at that time. But at the end of the day, like, I don't think the design of what they had intended met what I was trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah.
And I think they've reinvented it a couple of times over since, right? Like, and there's been some other stuff that's come out like Lighthouse and other things, right? Like, autopilot, and they've definitely matured it, and it's gone much further than where it was back in 2010, but it's still not quite multi-tenanted. It's still not quite as simple or as agile for the MSP to use across all their customers, but it's still powerful, right? So then this is where can you get the square peg to fit in the round hole, or is that not realistic?
So yeah, you're right. Intune is not multi-tenant. In fact, let's just say Microsoft 365 is not multi-tenant because it's the whole stack, not just right that you need, not just the Intune piece. And multi-tenancy is key, right? And for MSPs, and again, you talk about this quite often, like to scale an MSP, you need process and repeatability and consistency, right? You can't have every customer being a snowflake, right? You've gotta have like a view of the world. And so what Devicie does is Devicie is a management layer, an automation layer that sits on top of Microsoft 365, and in particular, Intune, and brings that consistency and that multi-tenancy for customers. And whether those customers are SMBs, SMCs, or MSPs, that's kind of what we bring to it. And we have a set of policies and templates, what we call runbooks, which fit particular use cases that organizations have that allow you to very quickly establish a Microsoft 365 environment that that works in that way and is compliant in that way. And so you can very quickly get to secure endpoints, but still with productivity on the devices for the users. So getting things like autopilot up and running, being able to like drop ship a brand new laptop and it'll boot and load and have all the right applications on it in 20 minutes. Intune does all that stuff great if you know what you're doing with Intune, right? And so we bring along all of the automation and that pre-configuration to just make that happen. And so literally in about 20 minutes, we build an Intune instance and configure all of that. And it basically will do what almost all organizations in the SMB and SMC space should be doing and don't get to themselves automatically. And so that's the kind of play there. And we're very aligned with Microsoft. We're part of their MISA Security Association. We're in the Microsoft Startups Pegasus program, which is a invitation-only startups program. We're very wired in with the Microsoft 365 product teams. We've got some stuff announcing at RSA next week with them. They've got some things announcing. We're part of that. So so we talk about ourselves as being, informed and opinionated around what your Microsoft 365 environment should look like, and kind of bring that through our product. And
so in the MSP space,
yep,
there's a handful of names that come to the top of my mind. I'm just throwing them out there so that somebody who's watching this or listening to this later can be like, well, I know what this is. I've seen this name before. How does this and this match up, right? So, when I think about some of the products, I hear like Enforcer.
Yep.
I hear CIPP.
Yep.
I hear SaaS Alerts, which I believe Kaseya acquired last year or got merged into the Kaseya companies.
Yep.
And then I hear there's one more.
Nerdio.
Well, Nerdio more recently. That didn't used to be their thing, but they definitely have announced that probably at I think their conference a couple of weeks ago. At least that's what I read. No, but there's one more.
IDO.
Augment.
Yep.
Augment. So those are I think there's 5 right there. They're the guys that are like, hey, in one shape or form, we want to monitor 365 for you because it's on its own. There's a lot there and you're probably not paying attention. Some of them do more configuration than others. Some of them, do more, remediation than others, but there's an overlapping of those 5 names in one way or
Yes.
another. So
Yeah.
where do you fit in that grouping?
So obviously, as a software vendor, we always like to say we're unique and differentiated, right? That's the kind of playbook 101, right? Mm. We are we combine our software platform as well as our service team, right? We've got a strong bench of um, Microsoft Intune and Microsoft 365 expertise on staff, and we see ourselves as an extension of the MSP or the customer, right? In terms of we're the guys who are looking out for their Microsoft 365 environment. So if something's happening that we are seeing, right, in terms of what Microsoft's changing or in terms of what's happening. So Windows Update obviously always works perfectly, of course, right? Um, so when we see things, we know who it's going to impact. And so, unlike organizations with a deep bench in the space, we are the informed and opinionated people who bring to them and say, hey, look, this is going on. We recommend this change. And for some of our customers, not only depends on their change management process, we're actually doing it for them anyway, and managing that environment. So, where do I think this is going? We're seeing Shane, our CEO, likes to talk about the fact that we don't want to be a button on a button. Many tools, many IT tools are just that. They're a button on a button. Do they make life a little simpler? Yes, maybe. But at the end of the day, you're still got to have the expertise. You're still got to know what you want to do in order to be able to do it, right? And so those tools may help experts be more efficient, but they don't actually help the people who don't know what they don't know, right? And so
That's fair.
what we're doing is coming along, I say, with this informed and opinionated approach and saying, yeah, this is what good looks like. And we can get you to your 85, 90% Microsoft 365 that most organizations, it's like the reverse 80-20 rule. Most organizations get to 20% of the capability of Microsoft 365 with 80% of the effort, right? And we flip that around. We get you to 80% with like near zero effort on the customer side, including automation, including management, including policies, et cetera, et cetera. And where we believe the whole space is going is these kind of tools go from being SaaS tools to being services software. And so, particularly that's where AI is taking things. But even without AI, you should be able to say, I want to achieve this outcome, and it's just done for you. And whether a human's doing that, whether or not workflow automation is doing that, etc. And going back to the button on a button thing, often what you're doing with the button on the button is like, I'm going to turn this on, and this on, which will achieve these goals. Where that should just be a defined workflow. I want this outcome. Go turn on these things for me automatically.
No, I mean, listen, there's no question that when you read into the fine print of what Microsoft puts out there, they're like, it can be made to be compliant for multiple things, but they're just giving you a vanilla and you have to go in and start turning knobs. I mean, I'll go with something as simple as, Colin, the Microsoft security score. When you go to create a brand new Microsoft tenant for the first time and create add users for email, the security score on that's like super low, like almost single digits, right? Like they expect you to go turn those things on. I often ask, why don't they just set the bar higher to begin with? And I guess their response is, well, we don't know what you're doing.
Correct.
So
And
we don't want to assume, right?
yeah, and they're building an environment for for everybody, right? Not for individuals. And again, you talk about like in the MSP space, MSP are likely going to be productive. MSPs are likely verticalized as well, right? And so, if you're providing MSP services to a school, it looks quite different than a doctor's office than a financial services institution, than a manufacturing
That's
organization.
fair.
You know, is the majority the same? Yeah, the majority is the same, but that those minority changes are the things that mess you up, right? And you know, that's what you need to be able to do. And you know, again, that's what our run books are about, is saying, hey, you need to be you're a school district and you're doing student devices, and but you've also got BYOD. Here's what that pattern looks like, right? And we can deploy that for you, and you can go work on that. And
So let me
yeah,
go the
so
other way then. So clearly, a lot of your value comes out when I'm deploying something for the first time. What happens if I'm an MSP and I already have a lot of pre-existing environments that, depending on when that customer was adopted, at varying stages in the timeline, right? It's like a sanitation of things has to happen, because not, it's all over the place kind of thing.
exactly. And so what we do in that instance is we we can connect in and see the state of that, and then give you a policy summary in comparison to what it would be to use one of the existing runbooks and policy sets that we've created. And also, the other like byproduct of this is Intune actually, because of all of its detailed interface around all the things, if you've built something that you like in Intune, you can suck it in and use that as a configuration, as a consolidated configuration, to push it back down. And so we're not, so like we're just automating the things to get done in Intune. And so at the end of the day, what is in Intune is the right thing. Yeah. And we can suck it out of that and manage it. And what does management mean? Management means making sure that it's consistent, having a copy of it, so having revisions, because of course, you know, there is no backup for Intune, right? Default.
Why is that? I mean, Microsoft, like everyone else in the tech industry, says back everything up. Actually, I think for a long time, I don't know if it's still there, but they would actually have in their terms of service that you need to use a third party to back it up. Like, just curious why there isn't a default backup option.
That is a very good question. That's probably outside of my pay grade. Um, but you know, it does create an opportunity for people like Devicie to come in and to be able to do that. Because if they did everything, of course, then where would we be? And so yeah,
That's fair.
So we're innovating in this space, and to go back to those competitors, there's a number of people who are, you know, taking this Microsoft 365 first approach, right? And it's a huge addressable market. It makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting. I was talking to one of my colleagues the other day, and we were talking about what the competitive landscape looks like for us. And we obviously know the players who we know and respect them, and you know, obviously keep an eye on them, right? But then, you know, you think about the other people, the enables. I know the enable team really well. John Agliuca was the CFO at Logic Now, right? Back in the day. So he's been around, and we're good friends. And you know, you look at those kind of guys. The same investment team that's behind Devicie is the team behind Kaseya and Datto. So we know that space really, really well. And they are, you know, they're Microsoft's competition, right? They're not Devicie's competition, if you think about it that way, right? The RMM space is more likely to be impacted by Microsoft changing licensing in ways that are preferential to MSPs than it is anything Devicie ever does. And so, and we firmly believe that that's where Microsoft is taking the journey, and they understand, they're learning what MSPs are. They have people who are spending time and effort on this, and you know, that's kind of what we're the bet on, right?
No, I totally get it. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, Microsoft's internal efforts, in my opinion, the way it's always been explained to me, is they want to deal with the enterprise. They want to deal with the 1,000 plus, 1,500, 2,000 plus, right? Like that's where they want to spend their direct resources. they claim that half their revenue comes from their partner network, but I don't know how to quantify it other than to take their word for it on a keynote, right? I mean, at the end of
Yeah.
the day, I think where
Well,
the
let's go
MSP,
back and still separate. Procurement is not bringing to market, right? And particularly in our modern marketplace world, right? The marketplace is how you can procure and manage your expenses, right? And that is a procurement vehicle largely. Now, what it does and how that licensing works for a given area is completely inside their control, right? This recent E5 on top of BP is very much an indicator to that market that it's not going to increase their direct revenue. Microsoft sellers, I think it's only like the top 2,000 accounts that have any kind of representation. Everything else is channel, right? But the things they do at product, the things they do particularly around licensing and what things can be used in the bundle, right? And how the bundle's shaped are very much SMC, SMB, and MSP. Like there's things they can do in that area which will directly influence, and they have the power to do that.
no, I get that. I mean, big picture though, I mean, the major back to the most people are using a very, very, very small subset, right? Like if I were to say the average MSP's end customer is probably using email, Teams, OneDrive, maybe SharePoint and OneDrive, kind of cross over there. So let's just put that in the same category. And there, I know very few MSP end customers are using Power Automate, are using Microsoft Forms, Microsoft Bookings, like I could keep going. There's so many like
Loop,
micro apps, right?
yeah. I mean, there's so many pieces that are in there that they should be using, and they're paying for, right? The number of business premium people who are not using Defender for Endpoint is
Most of them, I think.
yeah. And so there's a lot of opportunity there, and that's where that consolidation, going back to the start, that's why bundling from a price and a value growth comes in. And particularly part of the storyline you'll always hear is with Copilot, you've got to have your environment correctly set up, right? And therefore, Copilot means you've got to have a well-established SharePoint, right, in order to manage things well. And so if you're doing that, then why wouldn't you be using something like Purview? And the level of complexity is beyond most organizations, and frankly, it's beyond a lot of MSPs as well, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
so
100%.
that's not it's just a different game, a different world that I
I
believe
mean,
we are going into.
no, fair. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, I talk to a lot of MSPs. I'm sure you do too. I'm not so sure the Copilot adoption so far from an MSP standpoint is very high. Like as of today, it's April 24th, 25. I could probably, I would even go, this is a guesstimate, total guesstimate. Ready? Less than 15% of MSPs have deployed Copilot internal and or deployed it to their end, in my opinion.
Yep. Well, one of the problems was you couldn't actually use Copilot across multi-tenants, right? And so Copilot for security would only be on each individual tenant. So each individual customer would have to have their own Copilot for security. That's changed, right? From how that license works. And so that's another sign of Microsoft acknowledging the MSP multi-tenant piece within there. And so, yeah, and we're very early games in all of this area. And agentic management is just super early, and the rate of innovation going on in that space is just amazing. I mean, I've been around for too long, right? And this is even more game changing than people starting to actually use data correctly to understand what's going on in accounts, right? And
I,
understand the
I,
behaviors.
I've always been bleeding edge guy. Like, I just love playing with toys, right? Like, that's always been why I was so excited about technology in general. I feel like it's a little, we're still in the wild, wild west here on this topic specifically. And my big concern, and I know I've said it 1,000 times on these podcasts, but it's one thing if I'm using this new technology and AI, Copilot, whatever you want to call it, to help back end things, right? Like help me do more with less, right? But if it's customer facing, I'm still a little bit gun shy that I'm going to get a consistent result today.
Agreed. But if I can make an IT technician be more capable,
Mm.
I have skills that they didn't have, right? Um, or if I can take an even more expensive resource who's got the skills and knowledge and actually enable him to do it in a fraction of the time, then those two things are incredibly powerful to the MSP space, which at the end of the day is a labor arbitrage business. And so labor is absolutely the number one thing that you need to pay attention to in terms of productivity. And
Mm.
that's where it's going to come. And I really love one of the design patterns that Microsoft has within Security Copilot um, is that you ask it something, it tells you this is the answer to what you want to do and shows you, and then you make
Mm.
the decision about whether you run it. And so it keeps
Okay.
the person informed in the process. And that to
Mm.
me is the state of where we're at right now, which is, it's like you ask it the question and it's basically doing very fast research for you and giving you a recommendation. And okay, so if it's not quite right, you can kind of see what it came up with, right? And go, yeah, okay, I get the idea of what it's doing, but I didn't actually mean that. I meant something else, right? Or it didn't understand me correctly. And that to me is the big productivity gain. You're taking
So,
things that take people a lot of time and really, really getting it so much faster.
sure, and I'm with you there, right? Because it still keeps the human being in the driver's seat, just more information available to them faster, right?
Yeah, it's the brilliance of
I'm
why they called it Copilot.
No, I'm with you, and I think the marketing was good. My concern is where somebody is effectively creating a virtual agent and trying to displace the end customer's experience to offset the labor. And so this is where I'm just like, wait a minute, wait a minute. I don't know about you. I've been tainted for years calling in and like zero. Like get me to a human being. I don't want to talk to the answering, to the computer, right? Like I just want to talk to a human being that can answer my question. And like how many times did I get lost in the tree, and then just hang up and have to start over because I got nowhere, right? Like
Yeah.
that, I think that's an uphill battle, right? Because this is the experience people remember.
Yes. I was at Microsoft Ignite last year in Chicago. Obviously, we're very Microsoft, so we're at these things. And one of the sessions I sat in at the conference was an AI session with AT&T, and
Mm.
it was fascinating. Like they have something over 2,500 AI agents that they've written,
Mm.
and this has enabled them to be able to do escalated answers without escalation. And so there's many
Mm.
systems that the lower tier um, support personnel couldn't have access to because they were specific systems and difficult to get to, et cetera, et cetera. And they've wrapped them in agents. And so many questions
Mm.
can now be answered that couldn't previously be, that would require escalation previously. And escalation is both time and money, right? We know that. And it's escalation typically is not the best customer experience either, right? Because you want it fixed immediately and straight up front. And so to me, that's where we're going in the short term is how do I make things more efficient and more accessible to many more people, right? And then work through from there.
Okay, so but in that use case that you just mentioned with AT&T, it sounds like that was an internal resource, not an end customer facing resource.
Right. But if you go on their website and you do things like certain key tasks, right? It is equally servicing self-service, right?
Mm. Okay. So
But
obviously mileage is going to vary based on the situation.
correct. And again, in the IT space, there's some things that make sense, right? But there's a lot of things that don't make sense and still require the human there. But from an MSP perspective, I look at it and go, how do we make your business more efficient? How do we keep, at the end of the day, customers don't want a lot from us. What they want is secure and productive devices, right? That's it for the most part, right?
That, and when they need help, they can get to help quickly.
Yes. But at the end of the day, if the machine is secure and productive and does what it's meant to do all the time, right, then, you know, that's a little more, there's a lot less connection that's going on. And
No,
so,
the funny line I would say to respond to that is, well, the MSP is in business because Microsoft stuff doesn't always work.
exactly, right? And so you you need the tooling that gets them there, right? And then you want to be spending your time and effort dealing with mitigating the unknowns, right? And the challenges that are coming on through it. It's an oversimplification of it, but at the end of the day, it is an efficiency play that you've kind of got to broadly think about. And all the tools, whether or not you're dealing with RMMs, you go back in the whole history of the MSP space was all about how do I do more of this, right? In a more effective way than somebody hiring somebody.
No, that's fair. That's fair. So Devicie can help you with new customer deployments. There's all of these templates and workflows that just go into Microsoft and configure it the way it's supposed to be based on the vertical potentially for whatever the end customer is. There's also let me go into what you already have. Let me see what it is. And let me tell you what you could do to make it better or fix it. I'm just going to use that as a term. And then generally speaking, though, how does does Devicie just work with MSPs? Is it, hey, we work with MSPs and we work with businesses directly? How does the program differ if that's the case? Just curious how it's laid out.
Yeah, it's interesting. We actually, the same product, whether you're a direct or whether you're an organization who is engaging Devicie directly. Let's again not talk about how you procured it, right? But yeah, whether you're a small medium corporation, small medium business, or MSP, it's the same product. And we made that decision because as we went through it, we discovered that a lot of the same behaviors exist in both organization sets. And it made more sense to have a consistent experience so that we're not kind of branching something off. Well, you need this or you don't need that or whatever else, right? Which, that kind of feature turning on and off thing, it becomes very annoying for organizations when they know, but these guys can do this. Why can't I do that, right? It's like, so no, it's one product, works universally across it. And if you go back to we're about secure and productive endpoints. So what does that mean? Getting it, it's easy to talk about new machine deployment. How do you do that efficiently? Nobody wants to reboot 4 times, right? So a correctly set up autopilot that runs and gets your machine with the key apps on it and all running in 20 minutes. That's pretty standard, right? Application management, so patching, application management, again, Intune has that capability, but how it works and getting that application bundled and patched and everything else, we do all of that for people. At the end of the day, any gap for the SMC or the MSP in the Microsoft ecosystem, we're there to fill those gaps, right? And make the use of business premium E3, E5 as productive as possible.
Got it. So the MSP signs up, and then is it based on how many customers, how many seats, how many 365 licenses? Like, how does the mechanism of how
Okay,
your platform
so
works?
let's talk about business model then. So obviously MSPs are different than small medium business than direct customers. Than direct organizations. Let's call it that. And so we have the kind of licensing that organizations want, where it's tiered. They don't want to be getting a bill that varies each month based on how many employees they've got or whatever. They want a consistent pricing, etc. So you can buy in that way, how many, 250, 500, 1,000 seats, whatever, and it's done. And then we have MSP pricing, which is per seat, because that's the business model that they want to be in for the most part. Whether or not you agree with that or not, but anyway, that's the business model they're in. And so we offer both of those kind of pricing models. We offer it via the Azure Marketplace. We work through distribution. So we're with TD Synnex in the US, with Crayon in ANZ, and we'll be at PAX 8 Beyond, which gives you an indicator of where else we might be appearing soon. So procurement is, we want to be in the places where people want to buy, and that shouldn't be the barrier to it. We align usage with your Microsoft licenses. So we don't really, it's not really about how many devices. You could have 10 devices, like I think you're running today in this podcast. But we care about like how many Microsoft seats have you got, because that's where we're aligned.
Got it. And then is it consumption based, and like is it or is it tiered in any way, or
So
like
generally, both models are available depending on the business that you're in. It tends to make more sense for MSPs if they are deploying it across many customers to use the consumption based, because then they get the economies of scale that come from that, and as opposed to tiered. Some other players in the market work around tenant as opposed to user. But as I said earlier, part of what we offer is informed and opinionated about the whole environment, and we're trusted advisors as well as being software, and that's got a scale based on the size of organization, etc. And so user license based is the kind of model that works.
listen, that's how Microsoft does it. We're just gonna keep, why break the system if it works, right? Like totally get that.
Yeah.
And then does the MSP in a consumption model have to agree to a term, like a 1-year term, or how does that work?
We are obviously we're always open to having, like, we're a startup, right? And so we're not Microsoft when it comes to it. You can't knock on Microsoft's door and say, hey, can we do it this way today? And they're not going to do that.
Okay.
But obviously, there are opportunities to do different things, because there are different business models out there within it. So yeah, we're very flexible around terms and licensing levels, ramps, and all of those different sales tools that people will use to to be successful.
You mentioned earlier the service delivery part of it, right? Like the extension of the MSP. So like, how does the MSP engage you in terms of, help in order to provision or support, or how does that experience work?
Yeah, so what we've actually done is we have integrated our support desk into the product, and we're gradually adding it to more and more places. And so things like, so basically you run the tickets inside inside the product and the knowledge base inside it. And no surprise, where we're going with that is, a co-pilot like experience where you can, use a chat bot type interface to talk to the system from a ticket perspective, and as well as kind of action perspective in there. And then, there's humans behind the scenes that are looking at things as well as kind of interacting back around that.
Gotcha. You mentioned ANZ versus North America. I assume Europe is probably somewhere coming soon, if not already in the works, because that's where the MSPs are, those general 3 zones.
Yeah. So the background of the company is it was founded in Sydney, Australia. It came out of it came out of an MSP, and Insight invested in 2021.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, 2022. Can't remember. Somewhere around there. I should remember that. I don't know why I've suddenly blanked on it. Anyway, and then I joined about a year and a half ago, just under a year and a half ago, and we've opened up the US operation from there.
Got
So
it.
I'm we've chosen Tampa as our headquarters for North American operation, but we're a distributed team still, and growing out of there. And then we have customers everywhere. So we have customers in obviously good concentration in Australia and New Zealand, but then across the US and in Europe. And
That's
again,
awesome.
available by the marketplaces makes it very easy to transact. So again, something I'd heard you talk about was the currency fluctuations and all of that kind of stuff. Well, not only have you got that complexity, you've also got the tax issues around the world, etc. So, having organizations like Pax8, like Crayon, like TD Synnex, like Microsoft as your marketplace, be that storefront for a startup, just makes your life a lot easier.
No, for sure, for sure. It's so interesting. Throughout my journey, some of the best companies in the MSP sandbox came from an MSP trying to build something that didn't exist, right? And like that's where these awesome ideas come from, and great companies come behind them. Um, that's
But,
real
but
interesting that Insight invested what seems like pretty early into this
yeah,
one, but that's cool.
yeah, and we just announced last week that they just reinvested, um, and it's yeah, it's they've got I just go back. They've got a lot of depth of knowledge, and certainly over the time I've been with them, and it goes well beyond that. They've got a lot of depth of knowledge on this space at the different levels of it. If you look at what they've owned and sold, and you look at what they currently have invested, for instance, another one is CoreView, is another Insight company, right? In and around this space, they have a lot of understanding, and as investors, you know, their job is to make bets, right, and to help grow companies, and they see what we're doing, and where we're doing it and how we're doing it, and they see that opportunity. They are well aware of what Microsoft's up to, and yeah, makes they're a lot. Don't want this to come over the wrong way. They're a lot smarter than people give them credit for, not just fiscally, right?
I mean, I know we're kind of at the tail end of this, but unfortunately, the average MSP buyer or partner, whatever, however you want to define it, they only experience insight downstream, right? Like through the company that they're engaged with, right? So, for example, if the average MSP only knows insight as the people behind the Kaseya conglomerate, like who is the face of that for 10 years?
Yep.
Fred. Fred's not there anymore. So like that's all they see, right? That was the public face of the company.
Yeah. Yes.
So
That's part of it. That's
yeah, so I
and yeah, and you know, seeing seeing where they bet early to build these things that became these big companies, right? Is the other part of that.
yeah, you're talking about I like to call it the Shark Tank approach, right? Where they're like, hey, I'm just, this is a cliche, I'm just going to use it, but it's like, hey, if I make 10 bets, I just need two to win. And the other eight, if they don't work out, then I'm still okay. I still made out, right? I think your position, it sounds like, is Insight has a much better track record than 2 out of 10 because they have been around in this space for so long. They can make a pretty educated bet based on actual data.
We could go on for a long time on this, but if you just look back at GFI and the GFI group of companies, and
Mm-hmm.
I think we did 26 acquisitions that were backed by Insight, and picking up the pieces that has now become what Enable is, what TeamViewer is, um, etc. So yeah, super. It's there's a lot behind the scenes on it.
Yeah. Well, it's maybe one day we can like peel that onion back just a little bit more, right? Because I think that's it's fascinating to me, right? Like the magic, which is really sounds like it's more science, right, than magic, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
um,
There's a lot of interesting things in there. But
for
George,
sure.
great to talk to you. I know we're at time.
Yes, absolutely.
Enjoy your trip, um, and hopefully I'll be able to get back to New York.
Sounds good. See you later on this year, I hope. And everyone, the session was recorded. You'll find it at mspinitiative.com. Check out Devicie at devicie.com, I assume.
Dicey.com. Yeah.
There it is. And if you're just listening to the audio version, Devicie spelled Devicie. No I's. So Devicie.com. Check that out. Colin, thank you very much. Very interesting conversation. We'll talk to you later on.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Cheers, guys.